Renee's had 23 years, and in his 23 years, I have aged 46. Congratulations, Lo. All right. So tonight we embark on the 12 traditions, and I'm going to say a couple of things real quick. We're going to do about 3 or 4 traditions a week. The reason that we're doing a tradition, do you remember the story that I told you about the guy who comes from Europe over to America, and he only has enough money to buy a ticket? So he buys the ticket, he signs the contract, and he says to himself, well, I don't have money for food, but at least I can make the trip. So he gets enough cheese and crackers to last the 30 days on the voyage. And so the whole voyage across the ocean, he sits in his cabin during mealtime when everybody else is in the galley eating, and he sits in his room and he eats cheese and crackers for 30 days. On the last night of the voyage, he goes up on the deck, and everybody sees America, and he's standing up there watching, them approach the new land. And one of the members of the crew comes over to him and says, excuse me, sir, but I got to ask you a question. Have we done something to offend you? And the guy goes, no, everybody's been very kind to me. He said, well, we can't help but notice in 30 days you haven't eaten one meal with the rest of us. Why? And the guy said, well, he said, I just had enough money for the ticket. I didn't have enough money for the food. And the guy from the crew looked at him and said, man, you didn't read the contract. The price of the food was included in the price of the ticket. Here's the moral of the story. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is not bliss. I don't want to sit and eat cheese and crackers when I could be sitting at the table enjoying the feast with everybody else. The reason that I'm going to talk about the 12 traditions is because what I find is people don't know. I am not going to sit up here and read out of the 12 and 12. What I want you to have is an understanding of them, because there's a lot of misinformation around these traditions. You don't belong here. We can't do this. Can we do this? What does the group do? I believe that it is the responsibility of sponsorship to teach that to people. I believe if I sponsor people who don't understand tradition, I've cheated them. We have 36 principles by which to live, 12 steps, 12 traditions, and 12 concepts. They call it the 3 legs of the stool. You ever try to sit on a stool with 1 or 2 legs? Doesn't work very well, does it? These 36 principles not only apply to the AA group, AA service, but they apply to my life on a daily basis. And what I have found working with alcoholics and addicts over the years is as soon as you make it relevant to them, because they're very, very concerned about themselves, as soon as you make it relative to them, then they get into it, right? I remember being new, and I would hear people say stuff like this. Well, we don't talk about our tradition. We don't need all that. We do that every. Most of those meetings don't exist anymore. Most of those meetings don't exist anymore. What I found out, I was talking to people who were afraid of the traditions because they hadn't been taught the traditions. It wasn't their fault. And anytime that I don't know something, anytime I'm in ignorance about something, I will discredit it as being unimportant. Because if it really is important, I could be in trouble. So I will discount and discredit it as being unimportant. Okay? So the 12 traditions, as we go through them, we'll talk about why we have them. We'll talk about the history behind them. We'll talk about how they're applied in our groups. And then we'll talk about how they're applied in our daily lives when you walk out of here. We have our 12 steps, of course. And it's a beautiful thing. The steps, once I'm applying the steps to my life on a daily basis as best I can, which is all any of us do, it just like a river, a tributary will flow into a river, then it will flow right into the 12 traditions. Because what I get out of the 12 steps will be necessary in the 12 traditions. It's beautiful how the whole thing grows. sponsor used a statement over the weekend, how portals of spirituality just seem to open up as I progress in this. And then I have the steps and I have the traditions, and then they flow right into the concepts. So as we go through the traditions, like I said, I'm not going to sit up here and read out of the 12 and 12. We talk a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous about passing the torch to the next generation. And that we want, if somebody comes to AA, if your great, 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 great grandson or daughter shows up here 100 years from now, what will they find? Well, I want them to find exactly the same thing I found when I got here. And if we do not adhere to these traditions and concepts, there won't be anything for them to find because it won't be here. So the traditions are born of our experience. They're born of our experience. And I'll talk about for a brief minute how that came to be. But they're born of our experience. These are the things that we saw as being potential dangers to our unity and thus to our existence. Like the first step in Alcoholics Anonymous says, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and our lives have become unmanageable. Tradition 1 says our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. So what the steps do, the following 11 steps are what? Designed to do what? Enable me to establish and grow in a relationship with a power because I'm powerless. The remaining traditions, right, preserve the unity that we talk about in step 1. How do we preserve that unity? Our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. So the remaining traditions are there to ensure our continued unity and therefore the continued existence of our fellowship. So we have all these new people. Now, every week I sit up here and I listen to cities giving AA birthdays and anniversaries, 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. This room I'm sitting in right now in Sandusky. How many people in this room have 1 year or less of sobriety? Please raise your hand. Now, put them down, because I'm going to let everybody see y'all, okay? We're going to do this one more time. Would everybody in this room who has 1 year or less of sobriety, please raise your hand? Would y'all take a look at that around the country, please? Okay? So how on earth can I expect the next generation to carry on something that they don't know where it came from? They have no idea why we do what we do, nor do they understand how this ensures our future. How on earth can they do that? Would it be their fault? No. It's our fault for not doing what was done with us, and that is pass on these traditions and concepts that ensure our future. Okay? So that's why we do this. Like I said, this is not going to be some deep, intense workshop. I'm not going to read out of 12 and 12. I am not going to read out the service manual when we get to the concept. We're going to make it so that everybody here, right, has an understanding, right, of what they are, why we have them, how we adhere to them, and how they play out in our personal lives each and every day. Okay? So that's what we're going to do over the course of the next 3 or 4 weeks with the 12 traditions. So in the early 1940s, they opened an office in New York, and they were getting correspondence as AA began to grow. And groups began to form around the country. And whenever groups would have questions or problems, they went to Dr. Bob and Bill. All the questions went that the post office box 459 in New York, and between Dr. Bob and Bill, they would attempt to answer the question. Now, we'll talk about that more, how that's different today, because Dr. Bob and Bill obviously are gone, and what we do and the concepts and the way that our service structure is set up. But back then, everything went to the co-founders. And so they start to see all these problems developing, problems around money. There was problems around membership. who should be here, who should not. There were problems around property. There was problems around anonymity. There was a lot of stuff going on, and all these questions keep coming into New York. So Bill Wilson, seeing all this happen, says to Dr. Bob, you know, we have enough experience now that we need to start to put some things in place. They had people sending in membership rules. He actually asked in one of the early grapevines, send us whatever membership rules, because you got to remember, there's no traditions, there's no nothing. When everybody sent these membership rules in, what they realized was 90% of the people who were already in AA would not have been able to come in under these membership rules. Okay? There was a lot of fear in the early days, fear that people would mess this up. There was fear of what the public perception would be. Yeah. Okay? So there was a lot going on in those early days that was very, very scary. One of the things that they saw a lot of in the early questions and correspondence were questions around women coming into fellowship, who should be in here. There was questions about race, who should be allowed to be in here. There was questions about sexual orientation, who should be allowed to be in here. All those things have been addressed here, right? Very simply and very clearly, okay? So Bill begins to work on, in the beginning, he called them the 12, I think he called the 12 points to ensure our future. Then he called them the 12 points of tradition, and eventually it was synthesized into the 12 traditions. And isn't it funny that Bill used the word tradition? Because he felt if he used words like bylaws or rules, that people would be resistant to accepting it, right? And so the word tradition, and what he said he found was, when he had the traditions written, he published them in the AA Grapevine in 1946. And after he published them in 1946, he let everybody see them. Then, month after month, for 12 months, he wrote an article on each tradition, one per month. And you can find those very easily on the internet. And they will look something like what's in the 12 and 12, but in a lot of ways they don't. So if you want to learn about the 12 points of tradition, if you're a member of a group, and I hope you're a member of a group, because what is it here, right, that we want to be? We want to be of maximum service to God and the people around us. We want to be a member of a group that has purpose. We want to be a member of a group that is effective in carrying the AA message to the alcoholic who still suffers. Okay? So this is what we want to be a part of, right? Well, it's awful hard to do that when we have no idea about tradition and about how a group should function, okay? So already armed with the 12 steps in our lives, already with a relationship with a power greater than ourselves, already with a primary purpose to be of service to God and the people about us. We already have that in 1946. But now we need to do some things, right, to stop the chaos that is going on in the groups. And there was chaos. There was chaos, okay?
Children of chaos.
So after writing this series of articles in the AA Grapevine, there was going to be a convention held in Cleveland, Ohio in 1950, a public hall in downtown Cleveland. And it was to be the first international convention of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was at that convention that the 12 traditions were to be presented to the membership. If you ever get an opportunity to get your hands on the recordings of that meeting, you would love it. What Bill did is he chose 6 people to present 2 traditions apiece. Now, this is 1950, right? There ain't a lot of stuff getting recorded. There's no big conferences. He picked some people who he felt were good communicators, let's put it that way, and who had some understanding about the message he was trying to convey. So in 1950, and I used to have these on cassette, I don't have them on CD, but I listened to those 6 people over and over, and all they did was tell funny stories about what happened in their groups and how that led to that particular tradition. It's a great listen, it really is. So they come to Cleveland, he's got these 6 people, they go through this whole thing. At the end of it, Bill comes to the podium and he asks the membership that is there that day in Public Hall, could we ratify the 12 traditions? All in favor, right? All opposed? No. Okay, let's move on, right? Now, I had the privilege of knowing people who were at that convention in 1950. I knew a lot of people who were actually there. My sponsor was there. I asked him about it. I said, that must have been exciting. Bill they presented their traditions. History was made that day. What was it like to be a part of that? He looked at me and he said, we know what the hell they were talking about. But Bill was always coming down here with something, so we said yeah, so we could move on to the next thing, right? So it took some time. It took some time for us to be able to start to wrap our head around these traditions, okay? So we're going to start tonight, and let's talk really quickly about, as we go into tradition 1, let's talk about unity. Let's talk about unity.
Group of people that normally would not mix.
Remember, and we talked about this the last couple of weeks, Bill in the lobby of the Mayflower, and he's tempted to drink. And his thought goes to those who need help. Remember, what about all these people, these alcoholics who need what I have? So what is it that Bill is saying here essentially? I can't stay sober by myself. You ever hear that saying, if you want to keep it, you got to go to what? Right? So what Wilson realizes is that by myself, on my own, I am in trouble, okay? So what he does is he very quickly says a prayer, thanks God, says his sanity returned, and he reaches out, finds Dr. Bob, right? Dr. Bob eventually sobers up. Dr. Bob says to Bill Wilson one day at the breakfast table, Dr. Bob called Bill Wilson Willie. He called him Willie. He said, Willie, he said, I don't know too much about this, but I don't think that just me and you sitting here talking to one another is going to be enough. We need to find some more. So he made the call to City Hospital, then AA number 3, and that was the formation of the first group. And Alcoholics Anonymous, since that day, the day Bill Dotson, 4th of July, 1935, Bill Dotson gets sober. Alcoholics Anonymous, from that day to this, has continued to grow, thrive, prosper, and flourish, right? Together, we stay sober, okay? There was a friend of mine, he's deceased now. He always used his name, so I mean, Jimmy Smith in Lincolnton, Georgia. He's a great speaker, he's an old football coach in Georgia. And Jimmy used to say, Kent, we can do what I can't. We can do what I can't. Okay? And that's a very simple premise. Okay? No better than, no less than, no different than. The common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. Now, 5,000 years of recorded history, we will see alcoholics trying to get sober alone, right? Now, we saw in history, a guy came up to Bill Wilson. This is when Alcoholics Anonymous groups are having all these problems, and they're really wondering if they're going to survive them. And a guy walked up to Bill Wilson and he said, Bill, you know, I've been watching what's going on with your fellowship. You guys are starting to look like the Washingtonians. Then Bill Wilson said, really? Because he didn't know who the Washingtonians were, right? So he goes and he does some research, and he finds out that back in the 1800s, there was a group called the Washingtonians. They started in a bar in Washington, D.C., and they decided that they needed to quit drinking. So they gathered together as a group. Now, the Washingtonians did not have a spiritual program of action. What the Washingtonians had was a bunch of activity. There's a lot of people who think, well, if the Washingtonians had maintained any kind of singleness of purpose, they would have survived. I really doubt it. I really doubt it. They just stayed sober on activity. What they used to do is they liked to march. They marched, had parades, and paid speakers, okay? And the Washingtonians grew at an exponential rate. Within 5 years of those guys starting in that bar in Washington, D.C., there were hundreds of thousands of Washingtonians all the way up and down the Eastern Seaboard. And they were staying sober with these marching around and having these public speakers. Well, since they were staying sober, that was their original purpose. They decided, man, you know, this thing is so good. Why don't we get involved in some other things? So at that time, you had the temperance movement going on. They was trying to ban liquor, so they got involved in that. They got involved in the abolitionist movement to abolish slavery. They got involved in that. So the next thing you know, the Washingtonians were gone. They lost their purpose. So when this guy said to Bill Wilson, man, you got to be careful because you guys are starting to look like the Washingtonians. Bill did this research and realized our common welfare has to come first, and that our personal recovery depends upon our unity here. Okay? That we not be divided by what's going on in society, that we not be different, that we be unified, right, as a fellowship, and that our common welfare, right, comes first. The welfare of the individual, Bill said, comes closely behind, but our common welfare comes first. Now, if you think about the 12 steps, what has the 12 step brought me to? What's the principle of the 12 step? Service, is it not? Isn't it not putting God and others ahead of you? Is it not living your life in a new order instead of me, then you, and then God at the bottom? Now it's God at the top, then you, and then I'm at the bottom receiving the grace that God rains through you to me. Okay? So I'm now positioned to serve. So when I look at tradition 1, I'm good with it. Common welfare should come first. It ain't about me, it's about us. And if us is okay, then I'm okay. Is everybody getting this? Okay? That's the unity of tradition 1. Yeah. So in our groups, right, we do what's best for our group, not for individual members. Is everybody getting that? Right? All individual members, and we'll get into this in tradition 2, all individual members will have a say. But it is the welfare of the group. Why? Because without the group, I'm gone. Without the group, I'm gone. Unity. So how would this play out in my everyday life? How would this play out in my life? Well, let's talk about work. Let's talk about home and your relationship with your family. Let's talk about your community. Our common welfare should come first. So what happens if you take that home? I don't know about anybody else, but I used to live like this. It's my way or the highway, right? Ain't no common welfare, nothing. It's all about me. I do what I do. I want you to stop for a minute. What would it look like in your home if we placed the welfare of all first? If we sat down together, gave everybody an equal chance to give their input, and we made a decision together based on that. How do you think that would happen? What would that look like in your home, in your relationship with your significant other? Am I dominating? Am I trying to control? Oh, I know there's no control freaks listening to me tonight. I must be in the wrong place, right? But what if it's what's best for us comes first? Because my life will be better if ours is better. What about at work? Am I at work character assassinating people, trying to climb the ladder at other people's expense, lying, cheating, planning? Is that what I'm doing at work? Or am I working? When they brought the team concept, in to manufacturing. I was at Ford Motor Company. And we had seen a lot of programs come from the company over the years. None of them ever worked, right? Because they would tell us this is what they wanted us to do, but the people that we worked for didn't really buy into it, right? Until times got hard enough. And it's kind of what happens to us, doesn't it? Times get hard enough and your back is against the wall and things are coming apart. There was a change in consciousness. And they bought us something called CIWG, which was called the Continuous Improvement Work Group. And I facilitated one of those groups, and I became a CIWG trainer in Michigan in my last assignment at Ford. And what we did in CIWG is we told everybody here is a part of the whole. Everybody here will have input. I told them my job is not to tell you what to do. My job is to take this input, reach consensus, and then find out whatever we need to do, fix, or change so that we can all benefit from the success that it will bring. Is everybody following me? Okay? So we became unified. Okay? And I'm going to give you my own personal experience when unity takes place and is active in a group of people. We went from, I don't know, that plant was 15th, I think, in J.D. Power quality. We went to like 3rd. I went into a situation in Michigan where they were going to close a part of the facility, and I was given an opportunity to introduce the concept of unity to the workforce. They were going to outsource this work and close that part of the building. And I asked them to buy into it. Let's give it a chance. Let's work together. Let's put, instead of everybody out here worrying about themselves, hitting the stop button, being pissed off, let's get together. Let's work on each thing. And let's see what we can do as a group, and maybe these jobs can stay here. Those jobs are still there. Those people are still there. And I've been gone from there since 2007, and one of those guys called me like a month ago, out of the blue, called me on my cell phone. Guy worked for me. And what he had to say to me about what happened there had nothing to do with the product that we were producing. It was what happened there through the unity that we were able to achieve there. Okay. So when I walk out of here, Okay, and this is how most things have worked for me in AA. I don't know about anybody else in here, but I've learned things here, and very slowly, sometimes at a snail's pace, I've been able to transition those principles into my life, because principles are not restrictive. They are applicable anywhere you practice them. They're applicable at home, they're applicable at work, they're applicable in our interpersonal relationships. They're a principle. It's not restricted to a particular area, right? Spiritual principles, spiritual laws. The law of gravity is not restricted to Sandusky, Ohio. If I walk off this building, I'm going to experience the law of gravity.
That's the way.
To those of you listening to me tonight in California, Tennessee, wherever you may be, if you walk off the building you in, you too will experience the law of gravity, right? So what I find with these principles is, as I take them out of here, right? Because at first, I had to learn how to do them here. I was not accustomed to the common welfare. I lived, what did I tell y'all? My way, highway. That's how I live my life. I thought of no one but me. When I thought of you, it was only in the context of what you could do for me. I never did anything for another human being before I came into this program that did not have a string attached to it with something for me. I'm not going to sit up here and sugarcoat what I was. I'm selfish, I'm self-centered, and all I cared about was my own personal pleasure. I could care less about how it affects you. That's your problem. And so to come in here and be introduced to these principles, right? First with the steps, now we're into the traditions. I become a member of a group. I became a member of a group. I had a coffee commitment. I disagreed with that commitment. I disagreed with the way the coffee was made. I didn't even know how to make coffee. I had opinions about everything. Old timer told me, when we want to hear from you, we'll nod in your direction. All them guys died, nobody still had nodded in my direction. Right? But I learned, because I would sit there and I would be thinking to myself, well, that's stupid. I wouldn't do that, right? But I was smart enough not to open my mouth, right? And then here's the cool thing that happens if you're a member of a good group. They'll do what they was going to do, and it'll work. And you'll say, good Lord, I'm glad they wouldn't have listened to me. Right? I blew the whole thing up, right? So you start to learn in here. You start to learn about we can do what I can't. We can do collectively. Have you ever heard there's strength in numbers? Collectively, we can do what I cannot do. Tradition 1. So the remainder of the traditions are going to preserve, they give us some actions to take in order to preserve this unity. Because remember, Bill Wilson in the lobby of the Mayflower, Dr. Bob, Willie, we ain't going to be able to do this, just me and you sitting here, right? Unity, our common welfare should come first. Without it, we perish. Tradition 1. Tradition 2, and I'm going to read the tradition. Well, tradition 1, I'm going to read long form and short form. We already did tradition 1. Tradition 1, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. Now, that's a short form. In the long form, each member of Alcoholics Anonymous is but a small part of a great whole. AA must continue to live, or most of us will surely die. Hence, our common welfare comes first, but individual welfare follows close afterward. I will benefit if we do, but only if we do. If I just benefit, we don't. Everybody clear with that? Okay. Now, tradition 2, I love it. Tradition 2 is the only tradition where the long form is shorter than the short form, okay? Tradition 2, this is the short form. For our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. The long form is, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. One ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. When did I get a relationship with a loving God? Did I get that in the steps? Okay. So I'm going to need to bring that to the group conscience. Okay. I know today that when I was new and I had not been through the steps and I did not have a relationship with a loving God, wasn't nobody interested in me sharing my consciousness with the group, right? So the beauty of this is this, especially if you're in a group with a lot of young people, watch as they continue to progress spiritually in the steps. Watch how much stronger your group will get. Watch how much more purposeful, how much more focused your group will get, right? When I'm new, I look at my group and I'm worried about stuff like how many people come here. Do we have a big meeting, right? Does everybody know this is our group, right? Do I have a job where, do I get to chair the meeting so everybody can see me, right? Because that's what new people are like when they're new, right? As time goes by and as we progress spiritually, we're bringing something entirely different to the group conscience. The first thing, and it's one of the things that really baffles the world about Alcoholics Anonymous, because people show up here. I don't know about nobody else, but I showed up here. I want to know who the leader is. Who's the leader around here, right? Because a guy like me, I'm going to figure out how to try to overthrow the leader, right? So I can be that at some point, right? Who's the leader? We don't have one. What do you mean you don't have one? We don't have leaders here. We have servants here. We have trusted servants here, okay? So what is a trusted servant? What is a trusted servant? Right? A trusted servant is one who is empowered, right, to carry out a service for the group. You might be the treasurer, right? You might be the secretary. You might be a greeter at the door. You might be a coffee maker, okay? So what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous is we entrust the responsibility for these services to our members. They don't govern, right? And in most groups, we have the spirit of rotation where the groups will change, rotate the commitments on a regular basis, 6 months, once a year, whatever that is, right? Depending upon the size of your group. Some of the bigger groups have steering committees because the group is so big. I was a member of a group in Vegas. We had a 5-person steering committee. We had 4 large meetings in Las Vegas. We had 4 treasurers. We had 4 secretaries. This is a big group. We had commitments at halfway houses, detoxes, institutions and jails. So this was a big group. So we're paying rent at 4 different places in Las Vegas. So we had to have a steering committee. But the purpose of the steering committee was not to govern. It was to serve those 4 meetings and make sure that everything was in place and they had everything that they needed, right, to be able to function effectively. It was never to govern. It was never to tell the group conscience, nah, you guys need to change your format and you need to do this. You guys over here, you guys need to be doing this over here. You need to think about moving here. That was never done on the steering committee. All we did was make sure that everything was in order. Like I was the group treasurer. So all 4 of the treasurers, I had the bank accounts. I made sure that the money from 7th Tradition went into the right accounts so that they had what they needed to get their supplies, to pay their rent, to do those things. Do you see how this works? As we're all here to serve. we're not here to govern. And the book talks about, if you read it 12 and 12, it talks about the bleeding deacon and the elder statesman, okay? Now, the bleeding deacon is the one who believes his way is the best way, and if I'm not in some kind of position of power, the group is going to fail, right? He's a guy who's always wangling for control, always moving around in the back, right? Trying to manipulate things to go the way he thinks. That's the bleeding deacon. And as Bill said, the fate of most bleeding deacons is that they end up frustrated. Many of them leave. Many of them drink and die. And then you have, right, you got the bleeding deacon, and then you got the elder statesman. The elder statesmen are the people with more sobriety and more experience. So as the group grows, follow me on this, as the group grows, and you got a lot of young people in your group, they're going to have a lot of questions. Okay, like we would like to do this at the anniversary, or we were thinking about, can we as a group do this? They will come to the elder statesman who has the experience. So the elder statesman, right, by just being positioned to be of service to the group, will be able to share that experience with the younger members, right, and help them continue to learn and to grow. My question to you is that happening in your group? Is that happening in your group? Yeah. Tradition 2. And here's the beauty of it. A loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscience, when we go to the elder statesmen, they're the ones who spiritually are more progressed, aren't they? So the consciousness that they're sharing with us, because they've been doing this longer, right, is going to be more along the lines of what we seek. And what is it that we seek? We seek the will of God to be done in our group. Does everybody follow that? We seek in the will of God to be done in our group. That's the value of the elder statesman, is that we who are young go to them. They guide us. They have the experience with these traditions and experience as members to be able to help us understand where we need to go. Nobody running the show, nobody my way or the highway, none of that. They guide. This is how everybody grows. This is how we maintain unity. Okay. Tradition 2. I got 10 minutes on tradition 3. And this may spill into next week. I'm not sure. Tradition 3. The only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. The only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. One of the big problems that we had in the beginning, and I said it earlier, was membership. Who should be a member? Who can't be a member, right? We had all the rules and regulations that would have pretty much prohibited everybody from being a member at one point, right? So what did our experience tell us? There were some things that happened in the early days that guided the formation of this tradition, okay? I'm going to read it in the long form. Read this with me. Our membership ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism. Now, that is not meant to be exclusive. That is meant to be inclusive. In the first place, if you don't have alcoholism, why on earth would you want to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous? It must be a bad week for you, right? That's not meant to exclude anybody. That opens the door this wide. If you got alcoholism, we don't need to know anything else. Come on down. That's meant to be inclusive. That's not meant to keep people out who have other problems. People had other problems in the 1930s. You think they didn't? People have always had other problems. People have had problems with narcotics. People have problems with gambling. People have been different. People have had other social issues. People, that's forever. We don't care. And I ain't trying to hurt nobody's feelings in here, but I don't care what kind of dope you did. Now, I ain't staying sober behind talking about what kind of dope you did. Do you have alcohol? That's all I need to know. The first group started by a person who had a narcotics issue was in Shelby, North Carolina. This was in the 40s. And this guy was a doctor, and he wrote Bill Wilson, said, I want to start an AA group here. He said, I'm an alcoholic, and I've been on drugs for a number of years. Bill didn't really, not that really. We ain't got no tradition or nothing. Bill was like, wait a minute, you did what? So Bill said, well, I don't know about this narcotics thing, but you say you had a drinking problem, so, go ahead. Now, there's no tradition. So this guy starts his group. Bill Wilson used to have a map in New York in his office, and whenever a group started, he put a pin on the map. So he put a pin in Shelby, North Carolina. Okay? So a few years go by, and Bill is traveling. He's in the South. And he's got to go by Shelby, North Carolina. So he says to himself, I know they're down here. I wonder what happened. Should I go over there? And then he thought, I don't really need to go over there. And then something said, no, I'll go over there. So he sends a wire to the guy and says, hey, I'm going to come through. I'd like to visit with you, maybe even get to see your meeting. So he gets to the train station, and here comes two guys, Bill said, clearly alcoholic, just from looking at him, right? And then he sees the doctor, and this doctor, because of his alcoholism and drug addiction, had literally chewed his lips off. This guy was, right? So Bill goes over to the guy's house. They had dinner. He met the guys. The doctor was married 2 years. They had a baby. His mom was there, right? They had a nice little dinner. Bill was like, well, don't look like something good happened with the family here, Doctor discredited, all that, right? So then that night they went to the meeting. 40 people at the meeting. Bill Wilson said, if you went by population percentage, that was the biggest meeting in the country. 40 people. Beautiful AA meeting. Bill said what he realized was even though this doctor had other issues, he didn't have to talk about them, but he was alcoholic, therefore could establish identification. He said even the people in the town, because, when you're a doctor and you're a pillhead, everybody in town know it, right? They were skeptical. What kind of drunk is this, right? But a couple guys went in and got sober. A couple more guys went in and got sober. Boom, right? So after the meeting, they had Bill Wilson talk at the meeting. After the meeting, a guy come up to Bill Wilson and said, this guy will never tell you this, and he wouldn't be happy if I told you. He said, but every year in this town, around Christmas, we vote for the citizen who has contributed the most welfare to the citizens of our town, and he's won it every year. That was the beginning of moving us toward tradition 3. Okay. Now, very quickly, I'm going to tell you the story of Irma Lavoni. One of the saddest stories in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. Irma Lavoni came into Alcoholics Anonymous in Los Angeles. The first woman to get sober in Los Angeles was Sybil. Sybil Corwin. Sybil Corwin was the first woman to get sober west of the Mississippi. She got sober in 1941 when there was one group in Los Angeles. She's the first woman to come in. Later that year, a woman came in and Sybil became her sponsor. Her name was Irma Lavoni. And Irma came into AA and Sybil took her into her home in the beginning. And she began to work with her on the steps. Irma got cleaned up. Irma got a job. Irma got herself an apartment. Irma's life began to change. Sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, she was doing well. Irma had some behavioral issues with the opposite sex. And the group in Los Angeles sent Irma a letter.
I have that letter somewhere.
She received it on Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, 1941. I'm going to very quickly read you the letter that was sent to Irma Lavoni. It was mailed on December 5th, 1941. Irma Lavoni, 939 South Gramercy Place, Los Angeles, California. Dear Ms. Lavoni, at a meeting of the Executive Committee of the Los Angeles Group of Alcoholics Anonymous, held December 4th, 1941, it was decided that your attendance at group meetings was no longer desired until certain explanations and plans for the future were made to the satisfaction of this committee. This action has been taken for reasons which should be most apparent to yourself. It was decided that, should you so desire, you may appear before members of this committee and state your attitude. This opportunity will be afforded you between now and December 15th of 1941. You may communicate with us at the above address by that date. In case you do not wish to appear, we shall consider the matter closed and that your membership is terminated. The Los Angeles Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am not going to read these guys' names. And a couple of them, I know who they were. Irma Lavoni never came back to AA. Irma Lavoni died on Skid Row in Los Angeles because the only place on earth where she ever was understood, the only place on earth that she ever belonged, the only place on earth that people ever helped her, banished her. And Irma Lavoni died. Sybil wrote a letter to Bill Wilson and told him what happened. And Sybil said it. I don't know how much that played into Tradition 3, but I know that it did. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you are. It doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter what you're doing. All who suffer from alcoholism are welcome. Period. And quite frankly, you can talk to your sponsor about that stuff, but we don't care. What I care about is that you be given the chance to recover here and be a member here and have a new life here. We don't come here because we're well. And I don't care if you're black, white, Hispanic, red, green. I don't care what your sexual orientation. I don't care. We don't come here to talk about our problems. We come here to find a solution to our alcoholism. And Bill Wilson said, quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. Welcome home.
Amen.
Tradition 3. Inclusive, not exclusive, as some people would have you believe. Okay? We're going to stop right there, tradition 3.